wanted to come on today and talk about effective study techniques. So mocks are on the way right now. Many students have started mocks, and for many students, especially year 11 students, mocks are going to go right through till February for some students. And as we know, the mock exams, or the PPE, as it's also known, it is very important because it helps to give an idea of how the child will do in the final exams, and it helps the teachers at school to allocate like a predicted grade to the students. But one of the problems with mocks is that students can find it very challenging to know how to study for their mock exams, because it's not the final exams. And so they don't know how to study effectively to try and do as well in the mock exam as possible. So if you're here today and you're a parent watching this, it might be that your child is spending hours studying and not getting the results that they deserve. And as a parent, you might be thinking, okay, this shouldn't be that hard. There should be an easier way. And you're worried that in the long run, it's going to lead them to stress, anxiety, knocking their confidence, and that sort of thing. So that's why what we're going to do today is we are really going to focus on the key things that will help students with effective study technique. So what we are going to be talking about today then is mock exam mastery. And the title is Effective Study Techniques that Every GCSE Student Must Know. We're going to be looking at understanding why longer study hours are not always the best, and why they should adopt a focused approach and what approach that should be. We're going to be looking at the drawbacks of last-minute cramming and what the more effective alternative is. And the third thing we're going to be looking at today is rote memorization, why rote memorization doesn't work, and which study strategy is actually going to be far more effective than rote memorization. So I have created a simple 5-step process for effective revision. And this is something that would make revision for any student not just easier, but effective. And I call it the GRASP method. And this is the exact process that my students are using to revise to make that 2-grade jump in their studies, in maths, in science, and in English. So when you're watching this, if you watch this till the end, I am actually going to give you an opportunity to get that GRASP method. It's just an easy 5-step method that you can use with your child, that your child can use to study, effectively. Essentially, we're going to look at what are the mistakes that students are making right now. Okay, so the first mistake that students make is they think that more time equals more output, right? Let me know, can you relate to this, parents? Is your child spending a lot of hours thinking that the more time that they spend, the better, right? And even us as adults, we do that. I still spend a lot of hours on certain things that I'm going to move, that I'm trying to move forward. And I look back and I think, gosh, after all of those hours, I'm really not making progress, right? So that is a myth, that spending more time means that they're going to have more output, okay? What would happen is that they're going to burn out, and it's going to lead to inefficient use of time. And if a child is just spending more time studying without having the right approach, they're going to end up feeling exhausted, overwhelmed. And as I said earlier, despite all of those long hours, they're not going to see the results that they want. The analogy that I use here is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it, right? You just pour in and pour in and pour in, but everything is just coming back out again. So here's the solution. The solution is that students need to have a focused study session, okay? So essentially, instead of quantity, they need to focus on quality. And the one thing that I teach my students all the time is I said, you need to go in with a goal, right? And the goal in studies is your learning outcome. And what's really good with a lot of the books, as you can see this image here at the bottom, is that a lot of them will have something like learning objective, or they will have some sort of fancy name. What's the one in Edexcel called? Progression, something like that. But all they're telling you is like, what are the key things that you need to know? So when your child goes to learn, they need to just have that focus session of a short amount of time and say, these are the key things that I'm going to focus on today, okay? And they also need to think about, what do I need to focus on? What are the things that I need to work on more, that I'm struggling with more? So it's not just these are the learning outcomes, but these particular topics that I'm struggling with more. So that's going to help them to have a more quality and focused session. And when we do it that way, it means they're going to be studying over shorter time, but with more focused results. So they're going to achieve more in less time, and that's going to lead to improved grades. And so doing so, it's like then filling that bucket without any holes. It gets full faster and it retains what's poured into it. So let's go on and have a look at what is the second mistake that students make, and that is cramming. All right, so cramming is something that we've all been there. I'm sure that I crammed several times, you know, right, even up to sort of higher levels studies. One of the problems with a 3-year curriculum for GCSE students is that students think they have time. I don't know why, because I think, oh my goodness, we're going to learn the content or the teachers are teaching us the content over 3 years. So that means there's a lot to do. So that means I might even forget in a couple of years' time. So I'm going to continuously learn. But I'm afraid to say what a lot of students do is they say, exam's 3 years away, I'm good, right? Even now, as I'm talking about mocks, students say, oh, I'm not going to put in that much time in my mocks because my exam is still a few months away. And so they wait until the exam comes. So they have that procrastination until close to exam period. I mean, I can't tell you year after year after year of me doing this, the amount of students who want to have that last minute tutoring, which yes is good, but if they started earlier, there would be more for guarantee of a better grade. So they wait until the last minute and then they cram. But what is the problem with cramming? Cramming is you don't understand it. You're not taking in the information, you're not understanding it, you're therefore not going to apply it. And because you don't understand it, you're going to forget it. And so when it comes to exams, it means you're going to do poorly. And so that's why now when students are in the midst of their mock exams, they really need to have the correct strategy, right, for learning rather than cramming. And I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute. So really this method of procrastination, trying to cram everything at the last minute, it's like trying to eat a week's worth of food in one day. It's not healthy and it's just not effective. So what is the solution then to cramming, which a lot of students are doing? That is spacing out their studying and reviewing topics at regular intervals. Now, where students are close with marks, there's only so much spacing out of their studying that they can do, but they can still focus, make sure they're really focusing on the subjects and the topics that they need help with. But in general, what students should do is space out their studies and then review topics at regular intervals. So, for instance, if your child is learning, a topic today, then they're going to want to space that out, give it a couple of days, let it sink into the brain, give it a couple of days, come back to it, then maybe 4 to 5 days, come back to it, maybe a week later and 2 weeks later, and so on and so forth, right? And eventually this actually goes into their long-term memory. So studies have shown that it helps to improve memory retention. As well as improving memory retention, it also helps with understanding, which means, of course, they're going to do better in the exams, because if you understand, that increases your likelihood of being able to do well in the exams. It's still another step, which is application, but understanding is the first step. And so it's like watering a plant regularly is going to grow strong over time. All right. Then let's look at the third mistake students are making, and then we'll talk about what they should be doing instead. So the third key mistake students are making, and that is rote memorization. So similar to cramming, leaving things to the last minute, students just memorize things without understanding. Again, I was one of those students. I used to just sort of, in fact, initially that's how I, started to learn at school, right? Just to memorize something without really fully understanding it. And then that meant that when I get to the exams, I was sort of trying to regurgitate out as much as I could, but because I didn't understand, I wasn't able to achieve those higher marks. Because I didn't understand, I wasn't able to apply the knowledge, right? So remember, I talked about with exams, the first thing is understanding, the second part is applying knowledge, right? So where students don't understand, they wouldn't be able to apply their knowledge in different contexts, but also where something seems a bit more complex, okay? So they're going to struggle with this complex problems, and they're going to struggle to connect the dots. And that's why understanding is really key, because it means, like, for instance, I had an exam strategy training, which was really good recently with my students. And we talked about how you can look for keywords. One of the key things you can look for in exam papers is keywords, and it would help you to have a better idea of how you're going to answer that question. But there are many times, especially when it gets to like the higher level students, they don't give you keywords. You have to see the information and you have to infer the keyword. Okay, you have to know, that's what that keyword is. They're talking about transpiration, or they're talking about this or whatever. So if you don't have the knowledge because you've just been rote memorizing, then you're not going to then move on to that next level, which is application, right? Which is then, oh yeah, now I'm going to be able to actually figure out what that keyword is, which is then going to help you to do well in the exam. So really what happens then is that, that rote memorization, it's literally like memorizing words in a foreign language without knowing the meaning. You just cannot really form a meaningful sentence. So the solution here is students need to actively test themselves. And this is something that students need to do more, but they're not doing it enough. And it just means active testing just means once they've learned something, once they've read over the revision books, have a think about, try and check with themselves that actually they understand it without looking at the books. Because what students typically do is they just sort of have a look at the book and they say, oh yeah, that makes sense. I understand it, right? But it's when the book is not there and it's closed that they really test in themselves. So active recall strengthens memory. It identifies gaps in knowledge. So it identifies those areas that needs more attention. And so this is really going to help them to develop that mastery over topics and increase their confidence during exams. So these are the 3 key things that are going to be very useful for students right now as they do during the mocks. So the first thing is focused study. So really having quality studying rather than quantity studying, really setting goals over a short time periods rather than just studying harder and harder, thinking that it's going to help them achieve the goals that they want. The second thing is spacing out their learning. Now, because some mocks are going to go sort of right till February, so there's still time to space their learning, but where they can't do that as much, then they really need to hone in and focus on the topics that they need more help with so that that information really goes into their long-term memory. And the third thing that students need to do is active testing. And I would say this is one of the biggest things when it comes to mocks right now. Really think about, okay, what are the topics that I think I'm confident with? Then test yourself with exam paper questions to actually test, are you really confident? Are you really confident with those topics, right? And many times students can, when they actually start to do those tests, students are able to see that, okay, they're not really that confident.